Okay, I'm all set to go, and welcome to Watercolor Studio 42. Well, I'm going to finish up today doing probably, I say that this sometimes, but I end up doing another one anyways, but I'm going to do the trees with another autumn scene, and I'm going to do it in such a way that probably if you were following me along, you could sketch it out and paint it easier. I'm going to be using some soft background color for the sky, very light blue, and then I'll come in with I think I'll start with some of the textures of the trees. Now what's happening lately is the trees have kept the leaves a little longer than usual, but now they're really starting to drop off pretty fast. And so, of course, with less leaves, you see a little bit more of the trunks of the trees, and also you see the branches and whatnot, the limbs and the branches. And so I'll probably put in some of the limbs and the branches, kind of peekabooing through a little bit of the leaves. And of course, you're going to see more branches from day to day as the leaves blow off the tree. Now, let's see. This particular scene reminded me of the back end of Capron Park over towards Rathbun Drive. There's a little forest area or a grove of trees, and next door to the high school, Attleboro High. And so I'm going to do something similar to that today. And it's going to be kind of a upside down L composition where the trees, a grove of trees are on this side. You've got an open area for the field. So I'm going to start off, usually I start off with blue and put in a little bit of the sky, but I'm just going to do it lightly. Usually I wet the paper first for the sky, but probably you're going to be looking at the sky today kind of through all the cluster of the leaves. You won't see too much sky. And so I'll show a little dash of blue down and through here. It's going to be a little bit open there. And we can have the leaves go all the way across the paper here to the opposite side. Erase some of that blue. Blue is a stainer, and boy, once you put it in there, you want to lighten it up, you have to scrub quite a bit more. Here we go, scrub it out. And I don't have to be too fussy getting some of that blue in there because it's going to be mostly filled in with the trees. I want to remind everybody, I usually put some marks on the paper too. I know where the center is. I put a mark halfway at the top and the bottom, and then across this way, horizontally, I indicate where the ground is. And I'm always a little bit below or above those lines. I'm either to the left or right of center, but I try to avoid having anything kind of too centered. I try to break it up so it's not too symmetrical. So I offset a few things, one thing against another, but you always have to take into consideration you want to establish some sort of a balance in your painting when you're working. So I don't want to get that too wet because I want that to be dry out. So let's lift some of that out with the brush in through here. I put the tape on so that it kind of makes an imaginary, or I should say a false mat on your paper. Kind of locks it in a little bit. You can put a regular mat on your artwork too. You know, you have to either buy a mat or cut one at home on your own if you have a mat cutter. And then, let's see how far. I guess we can put a little bit of patch of blue in here, a little bit of patch over there, just a little bit over here. I'm looking at this, the picture that I have. I use the picture not to copy. It's almost impossible to copy leaves on the tree. How many thousands of leaves there are? Probably a million. I don't know. Thousands anyway. And so that's that. Usually the upper part of the sky, we call the meridian, it's usually a little bit darker blue as you come down and look directly into the, the environment. It softens out because of the air, the pollution in the air or something, I don't know. Not as bad as it used to be anyways. Okay. All right. Well, there is a fence that runs back here in the picture, but it's way in this background off there somewhere. So it looks like a softer blue. All right, now we have sort of this wash for the sky. And usually while I'm waiting for the sky to dry a little bit more, I do the foreground or the ground. Now you can do anything you want. You can have a path breaks this up and through here, or just an open field. That's what it is mostly in this picture. It's just an open area. And there's some trees up in this area. Trees are off in there somewhere. But in here it's just the open field. And I always put like a background color in there. And of course this time of year you get the leaves falling off the tree. And they turn sort of a brownish color when they start to dry out. So you don't see so much of the grass after a while. It becomes predominantly leaves. I'll go up into there with some of the trees in the background. They look more like sort of fir trees in back here. Okay. Now, where the cluster of leaves are, of course I can put the leaves in first because we know they're going to be lighter than the wood, the bark and the trunk of the tree and the branches and so forth. In the picture they look very dark. In fact, they're the darkest thing in the photograph that I'm looking at. Now, I can take I got some yellow, take a little bit of this, and I'm just going to dash a little bit of, break this up to the center area, and paint into the yellow with some blue to make it look greener. There you go. You can buy, obviously, some green paint to use, and probably that would be advisable, because a lot of times if you're doing a lot of outdoor pictures like woodland and all that, every time you have to mix the color, you're using a lot of yellow with blue to get the green. So it might not be a bad idea to just have a tube of green handy, so you wouldn't have to do so much mixing, I should say, of the color. So that's all right. Go up through here. Now there's a big patch right up down through here, a really stronger color. A lot of yellow in there. Almost could paint straight from the pan here. Get some of that darker color in there. You don't have to be too fussy with this because you're going to be kind of stippling it. Usually I take a sponge a little bit later on. The finishing touches, I break it up with the sponge. I just stipple on it to give it a little bit more texture of the leaves. Now, you're going to see some blue coming through, but also now we want to take a little bit of that yellow and mix it with some of that red and see if we can get a little bit more orange in there. There we go. And I'm going to, on top of all this, we can put some dabs of orange in. I sometimes use a smaller brush, but it really doesn't matter. As long as you get that paint on the paper, that's the big thing. And usually the outside contour, I soften that when I use a sponge. Now this limb comes way across, almost to the opposite side over here. And that's what I'm looking at, the photograph here. You get that sort of effect. And you can just tap with the brush, break it up, a little bit of texture in there. Let some of maybe the sky come through in places, little windows of the sky. I think there was a little window down in here somewhere. Sometimes, when I'm painting, I accidentally get carried away, I guess, whatever. And I fill in the space that I wanted to save, like over here. I gotta save some of that blue going through there. I want to save that little patch in there. It's pretty heavy in through here. There really isn't that much sky showing through there, but we'll let that go. Right down through here. So this can be you can actually use anything. You can use a stipple with a brush. They do have a brush that you can just tap with, stipple brush. But you can also use Q-tips when you're working on this also. Use some Q-tips. That gets some orange in there. You can use a little bit now, add a little bit more red into the orange. And keep stippling with the brush. I'm sticking with my 1 inch flat brush, but you don't have to. You can change the brush and use a round brush or one that's a little bit smaller than what I have here. So you get some of that texture. You can get some of the leaf texture in with the brush. Just use the corner of the brush, not the flat portion of the brush. Just use the corner of the brush. And you can put in some of that texture. I guess I've got quite a few leaves on the tree here. Probably a few more leaves than are out there right now. We've had few storms, rain and so forth. Early a snowstorm in October. A little bit of snow. Didn't last long because once the sun comes out, the snow disappears pretty fast. But it was still October. Now, usually, you get snow, around maybe the first, second week in December. You're more apt to. But October's a little bit early. And I guess we've had a warm spell for about 6 days into the beginning of November. But, like they say about New England weather, you wait a couple of minutes, it changes, I guess. Okay, getting down to the... See, what I'm doing now is just stippling around, getting some of the textures in. Now, you're not going to see, this is the tree that's going to be in the foreground. As you go further back, it's less. It almost becomes almost a solid color that you use. You don't have to try to create any leaf texture at all. So, if you're starting out as a beginner, this is probably a good subject to work with doing trees. And of course, autumn is a good time to use some of those warmer colors in your picture. There you go. Looks pretty good up in there. I'm painting right out to the edge of the tape here, so that when you take the tape off, you have sort of an idea what this would look like with a white border, matte color, texture. Let's see, here we go. Down and through here, I'm just stippling through there. There's going to be some of the trees in the background. Here off in the distance. So your colors can be sort of almost a flat color through there. You don't have to worry about as much detail. You can work on this and stipple quite a bit. Before you have to kind of clean it up a little bit and pull it together, define certain shapes and things in here. That's probably the background line. Way up over in here, those trees are easy to put in. You just have to kind of make an interesting contour shape of the trees. I'm not getting quite as much green just yet. You know, I'll put in some darker greens. Now, where the ground is, like here, through here, it's always going to be darker eventually, because that's going to be kind of in the shadow, in the shade. Another thing I do a lot of times, out on the tape, I also put some arrows pointing in from the right side, just as a reminder of where the light source is coming from. Now, this particular photograph that I'm working from, the light is definitely coming in from the right to the left. So I'm just putting where the light's coming in with a couple of arrows, just to remind me. Because sometimes when I stop painting, I get kind of carried away and paint in where I shouldn't. Probably, I'm breaking this up back there, but it is sort of a real level area, you know, back in there. And that's going to be quite a bit darker. Excuse me. Going to be quite a bit darker where the trees, the trunks of the trees are going to be in here, something like that. And they're going to be more or less in the foreground. There's going to be one large tree that breaks up into here. That's all that part of that tree that's the closest to us. The base of the trees, the further up they are, that creates the illusion of them being further away, along with the size of the tree and the amount of texture that you use when you paint the tree in. I'm going to put some darker shadows through here eventually. There's going to be more green in there. So I can just kind of work back and forth horizontally. Not too many bumps in there. If you want to leave a little bit of a little brook or stream in there, that's fine. You can add whatever you want. Put a fence in the foreground, or there is a fence that's way off in the distance, and I can see it on the calendar, but you wouldn't be able to notice it at home looking at it on TV. So anyways, let's put some more just some bands of color coming across. If you want to make the line wider, just turn your brush instead of putting it on edge, just turn it flat. So you just get a wider brush stroke. You could almost paint, this is a picture, and a lot of pictures can be just done really using one brush. And a lot of times artists will do that. And they don't have to change the water. They keep the water fairly clean. When you put your brush in the water, you don't swirl it around. You just tap the brush and then wipe it on the edge or wipe it off on your towel if you don't want as much water on the brush. Let's see. I would just go to the bottom down in the just put some color. Let's make this a little bit brighter up and through here. Let some sunlight get into there. Yeah, take that out. And of course, yeah, if the light's coming this way, you're not going to see so many shadows. Unless there's shadows of a tree that's not in the picture coming across. That could be more than likely. I take in a lot of these art shows sometimes, and they have a demonstrator, art associations around the area. And the one doing the painting sometimes makes some interesting subjects. And there was one time he says, I'm doing a picture of a lighthouse on the seashore, but he says the lighthouse isn't going to be in the painting itself, the physical, building itself. He says, I'm just going to have a reflection across the sand of the contour, the shadow of the lighthouse. And it was interesting because the cast shadow across the beach, you knew the lighthouse was in the painting. I mean, it was in the area, but not actually painted into the picture. Just a shadow of the lighthouse. That was interesting. So you can have shadows of trees that aren't really in the picture. Now, the thing is, I keep building up my colors. A little bit of sometimes I add a little bit of blue, a little bit more into the yellow, and let's see if I can get a darker shade of blue here. Yeah, there you go. You can get that in there. And wherever you see, like I said, back here, there's always that shadow underneath the trees way off in the background. Now, these rules, there's certain things that always apply. They always apply. Lines, vertical lines, they're up and down, horizontal, going across, diagonal. I'll show you a diagonal idea. See how I can put that in? And I can zigzag, take you to the background like that, so forth. But that's how that works. I'm suggesting where the trees are going to go. Now, the background here, like I said before, is not going to have an awful lot of texture or detail. So, but you do want to get an interesting shape of the outline, the contour. So you kind of break that up in here. You can break it up over here if you want. Now, sometimes what works is that the less you do, the less you put into the picture, it works better. And so keep that in mind when you paint. You don't have to get too fussy. You just suggest things more, One brush stroke is adequate sometimes. If it looks okay, I don't tamper with it. I just kind of leave it that way. But can you see how I'm kind of building this up a little bit? And I think what has a lot to do with how much you paint is how little that you do with the actual drawing. I think sometimes when you do a drawing, if you sketch it out with a pencil or pen or whatever, I think automatically you start getting too fussy and you try to put every little fussy thing in. But the problem is when it comes to painting that in, then you got this bigger brush, you don't have a fine tip pen or pencil, so you start trying to paint fussy stuff and you can't get it with a brush. So you're better off just to make these areas more of a solid color. Even what I've done so far here actually probably would be okay. But I do have to bring it out a little bit more. I need, what would happen was if I left it the way it is now, it would dry out probably too light and everything would look too faded. So you have to keep building up your texture. I use a little bit of sepia in there, and you can use some of that Payne's gray too in your color, and you can start making those colors darker. Now I don't like to use black at all straight from the tube. I always put something in the black, and maybe blue, or like I mentioned, maybe Payne's gray, which is almost a black color, very dark gray. And then you've got your brown, which I use sepia. It's a very dark brown. You see how I'm sort of using flat part of the brush, and also now you can use turn the brush and put it on the edge, and you can get some little finer texture in the trees in the background. But there's always going to be, you always have to make sure the underpart, let's get a little bit darker here now. I'm using Payne's gray with my sepia, but you always want to start working and make sure you've got something real dark down in through here, the base, because there's very, very little light gets underneath the tree. Anything that the light shines on, and there's an under part of it, plants or trees or whatever might be out there, always gets darker. And you can see everything kind of building up and taking place here. At least we hope it does. We don't know. We hope it does. Okay, see how I've got kind of thin edges, and then you can pull some of that out and soften the edge. And I've been using the flat of the brush. There's going to be a lot of shadow underneath the trees in here. Now, like I was saying, if you're beginning, if you're starting out painting landscapes and trees and bushes and whatnot, that's a good subject to start with. And even the texture of the ground and the sky. I think sometimes what we do with the sky, see how light that blue is? Now you can hardly notice it. And so a lot of times before something dries out, let's say if I wanted the sky to come back, I could blot it a little bit and take some of the color out so the sky would show through a little bit more. Now, there's going to be some lighter areas. Remember I said the light's coming from right to left today. Usually I go the other way for some reason. I don't know. I always put the shadow on the right side, and the sun's over here on my left. I guess it's because I'm left-handed. I don't know what happens there, but that's the way it is. Put some yellow back into that. You can always build up your colors. You can always wash it out if you want, and then come in with another shade. Okay. I still want to keep that a little bit stronger orange here. So I don't want to keep patting it and lose it. It's stronger color. Now, the artist can take the liberty, of course, when you're painting something, you don't have to feel as if you have to copy the photograph exactly. In fact, you have to sometimes leave things out and put something in just to kind of balance it off a little bit more. You have to get used to that color distribution and so forth, where you repeat a color, where you see it somewhere else. A little bit of orange down in there, maybe a little bit of something over here. Even in the foreground, there might be some, some texture of some leaves on the ground. So you put a little bit of orange. I see how you kind of unify everything by distribution of the color. So this is a good painting to, when you're starting out, like I said, to work from. Do something that's easier, and then you can always build up to something that's a little bit more difficult. When you only have a short amount of time, too, you might not want to take on something that's too fussy. You might be able to say that's what I'm doing today. I'm not working on something that's going to be too intricate and fussy to work with. There you go. But you can lay it in. You can get most everything in with a big brush. I never start off with a thin brush, If I started off with a brush, like a rigger or something, it would take me forever to put all that in, and the whole thing would look all streaky because you're trying to fill it in with too small of a brush. And that's the mistake that when you're starting out painting, a lot of people will, students and whatnot, they'll come in with all these little thin brushes and no big brushes. And, the reason behind all of that is that they're coming in and they're feeling if they use too big a brush, they're going to lose control of the brush and paint too much. But not really. Not really. Once you start getting used to painting, you'll want to use a big brush to start with, and then finish up with the smaller brushes. And then finally, all the little fussy work, we call it the calligraphy of the work, the linear stuff, you finish off with a very thin brush, or even a fine pen or whatever, something that's a finer tip to it. Okay, there's a hint of some orange. And what I'm doing is carrying that color throughout the whole composition. Now it's probably in there. It's being picked up by the camera of the person that photographed. That's probably in there. And we can overemphasize that color. We can bring it in there a little stronger than maybe what the camera does. Okay, that's that. I want to leave this a little bit lighter because it's out in the sun. Now, whether I want to leave that in there, that could be a little pool of water. I could leave that in. If I wanted to extend that, I have to use my brush now, almost like a sponge, and keep pulling through that. But see how I can take some of the color out now and make that look like, let's do it in here. I can make that look like it's more or less of a brook running through there. If I keep pulling that color out, see, lightening that, see how that looks like a brook in there. I may leave that the way it is, because in the photograph, all it is just an open field. So this adds a little bit of interest to it. If I make that into a little brook running through here, may have to keep pulling that out a little bit more, lifting some of that color out. And when I do the bank, the opposite shore, I'll make that darker so it shows up more. Always have to have that contrast. Sometimes you have to squint too to see where you have to go darker with or lighter, if you will. Yeah, go right into the corner, right to the edge, because I'm going to pull the tape off. Put that in. Okay. So now, I'm almost set now. If you want the wood part of the tree not to be too blurry, you have to let this dry a little bit more. And where you know you're not going to be having to put some trunks of the tree in here, I can come back and paint a little bit more contrast into this middle area. Let's get it a little bit darker there. They call it layering. You can put layers and layers of paint in. But see how I can make that darker in here? Right across there. That's what it is in the photograph that I'm looking at. It's much darker back there. And over in here, a little bit more. There's going to be some more shadow in here too, underneath the tree. And I'm kind of leaving that in to be water and kind of running a little brook through there. And it just adds a little bit more, and it breaks up that large shape you have in here if you break it up with a little bit of a brook or a stream running through there. A lot of people do, well, not a lot of people, but a lot of artists paint golf courses, and they'll actually go to a golf course and they can work from different areas looking at it. And, you know, all you have to do is put a few little flags in there and a couple of dots for the, the holes. And you've got yourself a golf course. Yeah, but actually you're doing a landscape painting. And golfers love those things. I guess they do. I shouldn't say they all do, but they might like a particular course, especially if they've had some winning games there. Sometimes you have your favorite thing. Sometimes you can put the clubhouse in there, part of the golf course. And that's really kind of defines where you're located. See how I can make those a little bit darker through here, a little bit darker over here. And then I look where I can work. Eventually I'll put some dark up in there just to counterbalance the painting. But that's how that works. This shadow here can be much darker around the edge of the little stream that comes through. You can put like a little walk that you can go across. Some of these golf courses have that type of thing, or nature trails and whatnot. Sometimes you could leave a white area. That could be part of a building in there. Just show a roof and a couple of windows, and you got another little house or something that's showing off in the background. And if you don't want to do that, you just tap it out. Okay? Now, let's see. I've got to make sure we're at the edge. Got all that filled in. Got a little bit more. I can put a little bit more up in there. What we've got to do is let this dry, and then I can come back and I can do some stippling with my sponge. I think it's pretty well set to do some sponge work. This can still be darker here. Right through there in the photographs, it's really quite dark. And let's see if I can darken that up a little bit more. Right up in there. Just a little bit of that. Maybe a little bit more. Push it up into there. Make it look more interesting. Yeah, that can stand to be a little bit in the shadow there. And even eventually over here we'll put some shadows, counterbalance things. Yep, okay. Now if you're not sure where the tree's going to go, you can, once this dries a little bit more, you can go over it with a pencil And I like the way this tree works in the photograph because it's bending into the painting. You don't want something too strong going out of your picture. You want to keep everything into the picture if you can. And this tree is leaning in, and this limb is coming way across over almost to the opposite edge. But I'm going to have it stop about there and break it up a little bit. I don't want to show all of it. Then it sort of V's off here. There's going to be a lot of other trees and things in here in the foreground, right in through there. Okay. And this can go down, the trunk of this one can almost go down to the bottom of the paper the way it is in the on the calendar. So now, let's see how we're doing. You can kind of help it along a little bit if you want. Pick up some of those wet areas with a sponge, and that will dry faster. Or with a paper towel too. You can use. Your towel gets too messy, you can use a clean one. Now, what I want to start doing is working with my sponge. Now, I usually work with a natural sponge from the ocean. They do have these manufactured sponges you can buy. But you start off, and you want to dip it into water, but you don't want to get too much water on it. And just pick up some of the colors that you still have on your palette. Just pick up some of those colors. It helps wipe your palette off, too, and you don't waste anything. You really clean up the whole thing. See what I can do with this. I may have to go a little bit darker. Now, there's quite a bit of texture down through here, right in this area. Now, if that's, I don't know if that's, yeah, that's okay. You have to make sure it's dry enough, otherwise you don't get that texture at all. It just kind of fades out or blobs out, if you will. I'm making up some words for how to describe things here. I don't know, see how that's too wet. So what you do is take your sponge, tap it on a piece of towel, and go back in and pick up more color. Into my sepia here, make it a little darker, maybe. Now, oh boy, I got some puddles there. I want to get those. Otherwise, we're going to have the same problem when I start using the sponge again. There you go, that's better. See it? It's better. You want to get some of the texture. And that can go up into here. Now, don't get carried away. Don't make everything too textured. Kind of be choosy where you want that texture to go. If you want to put a softer edge on some of the leaves, that you can hit that edge with a sponge and sort of soften that out. But of course, sometimes my students they get carried away. Even I get carried away with a sponge, and I start doing too much sponge work. Pretty soon, the whole thing's one big leaf pile, if you look at it. I don't know, down in here maybe. I'm pressing hard to sort of make the color solid through there. Here we go. You can see how that works out pretty well around here. Okay, see if I can get some more texture in there. All right. Now I'm going to let that set a little bit more, and I guess we're dry enough in here. I can start doing some of the stronger shapes of the trunk. Now, I was using the big brush for a while, the flat 1-inch brush, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down to a 1/2 inch. It's still a flat brush, but I didn't want to make the tree too wide. And I'm going to start off, and I'm going to make it quite a bit darker. Let's use some of that Payne's Gray in there. And remember I said something about, well, I did say it. We want the sunlight coming in from the right side to the left. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the tree that has, it's the closest to me, so it's going to have the widest trunk. And I'm just going to put that in. And if you want it to go thin, just turn your brush and have it go out like that. Now that's light. That's very light. So what you want to do is come back, and you want to keep one side, the sunlight's going to be hitting on the right side of the tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and go a little darker on the left side. So you have a contrast there. Now, sometimes I take and soften that line out a little bit more. Now I'm being extra cautious about how dark I want it to go. I probably don't have to be that cautious because I can always come back. I'll show you what that does. Let's say, for example, in here, see in the photograph, it's very light here. So I take my brush and take some of the color and the water out of the brush and just go down the side and lift some of that color, that dark color, out with the brush, using the brush almost like you would a sponge. And so that I'm not worrying about that too much. Now, we're going to have a lot of little trees in here. And because they're so close together, you can almost paint that a solid color in there. See like I'm doing? And the trees you want closer to, you just draw the base of the tree, come down a little further. The ones that are further away, the base of the tree, let's put this one in here a little closer. We can put another one over there. See how you can do that. Now, another thing you can do, let's say you can use this brush again. I'm using a 1/2 inch flat. You can come up through here and see how you can lift some of that color out? And so now you can clarify a little bit more the trunks of the trees in the background here. In fact, if you take a real thin brush, like maybe a rigger, let's take this thin one, see if I can show you. This can be pulled even through there more to make some thinner trees back in there. Okay, how that works. Now, if that's still wet, this tree's going to blur a little bit. So what I have to do is not be too ambitious and try to paint so much into that too soon. I may have to come back eventually and put some little darker contrast around through there to break that up. And this tree, the big tree here, I'm letting it dry out a little bit. We can come back in with a smaller brush and give that another coat on the shadow side up through here. And again, you can kind of lift some of that out, soften it out, kind of pull the color out to the middle. Yeah, something like that. You don't want to make it look like it's kind of broken up too much, but you can have it show through in places. You know, you have some leaves in the foreground. So maybe you might show a little bit of it coming into here, then pick it up there, and then pick it up stronger here, see? So that you're kind of looking through all that. But you have to be careful how you do that, because you don't want to make the tree look like cut up pieces of wood. Now, there's a limb that comes from this tree, and it's coming across right in through here. Right in through here. I hope that's dry enough so I can put that limb in. I'm using the flat brush, but just the edge of it. And putting that out. And if I want to go thin, I just lift up on it and pull it out that way. Now, if that's too strong, we can break it up a little bit and show some leaves coming through in places like that. See how you can take some of that out. It doesn't have to be that. It can be sort of broken up. But you have to be careful that you don't get carried away too much with that. You have to be careful in through here. See? Take that right out of there. And I think I can make it stronger coming back into there. Right here where the trunk is, like that. See how you can do that? And then, because I can stipple and break this up a little bit more, there are some leaves that would be overlapping that in there. You have to make sure you don't blot it out too much. It looks like a thumbprint if you do that. You can take some of that out. Too much texture, just quiet it down a bit and have it disappear. Soften it out. See that there? It looks too much like a thumbprint. So I break it up a little bit more. Take something away from here, there, and pull some of that out. I still don't like that in there too much. I'll come back, hit that with the sponge. And you can have some smaller little branches coming off of that too. Down through here, I think I'm going to use my rigger for that because that's a very thin line. You can barely see it coming down through there. Now, where you can show a little bit more of the contrast around the tree, you can come back in and you can kind of push into this. Let's get a little bit more color. You can push into here and you break that up. I'm going to kind of soften that around there. It looked too much like a roof of a house there, which you could put in there if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do that today. We'll take that out of there. It still looks like a house, doesn't it? To me, anyway. Okay, now, there's certain little branches, that peekaboo through here and there. But I'm going to let that dry a little bit more and finish this across in here. Make that a little bit darker there. I can go back to my larger brush again and come back in through here, use the edge of it, and just do a little bit of this stippling with the point of the brush. Just break this up a little bit more into here. Now, one of the problems I sometimes have is I try to do too much too soon and I don't let certain areas dry enough. Let's see if I can use my rigger and just put in some of those little branches. There's a branch that breaks off here, and see how that branch can come in here and it can break up some of that area. But, that's too much, so I quiet it down. And in the picture, in the photograph, there's actually, you don't see as much of that, almost a hint of it coming into that. And then there's another little limb that you can put into there. Let's see if I can get that a little bit thinner. I want that to be sort of a little bit thinner. And if it's too dark, you just hit it and blot it, quiet it down a bit. Now, there's a lot of little fussy stuff you can do to this painting. I probably would clean this up in here a little bit more. Make it clarify whatever's happening in here. Put some more texture into that. And this big tree, the limb has to be stronger. So that has to be a little bit stronger. So you may want to come back and really come into that one with a little bit darker color, especially down in here on the trunk, in the background, the shadow side. You want to make that a little bit stronger in there. Again, that can be kind of broken up a little bit more. Okay, that might take a little bit of fussy work in through here. That probably would be better off if I let that dry more. I don't like that heavy spot, so let's take some of that out. It's not that dark in the photograph either. And add a little bit more texture, break this up in here. The tree needs a little bit more work on this side also. But this gives you an idea. Now, I'm just going to take and pull some of the tape off. And this will give you an idea what your picture is going to look like once you kind of lock in the edges. Take a little bit of that out. This definitely needs a little bit of more texturing with a sponge, and it's good tape, sticks with me. Let's see, take this off here. Whoa, kind of pull it down at an angle so you don't damage the surface of the watercolor paper. And we'll take a look at it. So this probably needs a little bit more work in there, but we're running out of time, so I'm going to say what I always say at the end of the show. Brushes up, and thanks for being with us, and see you next time.